In the chaos of France's collapse in 1940, German forces captured more than 3,000 of the smallest, strangest tanks they had ever seen. French troops had abandoned them by the hundreds. Wehrmacht officers called them toys. Yet within months, Germany was modifying, rearming, and deploying these supposedly useless machines across every front from the Arctic Circle to the deserts of North Africa. The Renault UE Chenillette, a tankette so small that two men could barely squeeze inside, so lightly armored that rifle bullets could penetrate its sides, so underarmed that most carried no weapons at all. So why did the Third Reich, with its vaunted panzer divisions and industrial might, bother stealing thousands of them? The answer reveals one of the Second World War's most overlooked truths. Glamorous tanks win battles, unglamorous supply vehicles win wars. France in the 1930s faced a military crisis that had nothing to do with firepower. Their artillery still relied on horses, thousands upon thousands of horses, just as in the First World War. Every division needed them to haul ammunition, food, and equipment to the front lines. But horses require fodder, rest, and veterinary care. They panic under bombardment. They die from overwork and disease. And France's military planners knew that in a modern, mobile war, horses would become a fatal liability. The French army needed a mechanical replacement. Not a fighting vehicle, but a workhorse. Something simple, reliable, and cheap enough to build in massive numbers. In 1931, the infantry issued a requirement: a small tracked carrier that could follow troops anywhere. Across mud, through trenches, over shell-torn ground where wheeled trucks became helpless. It needed to carry supplies, tow anti-tank guns, and above all, be so inexpensive that the army could afford thousands. Renault, France's largest vehicle manufacturer, answered the call. Louis Renault's engineers started with brutal simplicity. Strip away everything unnecessary. No turret, no main gun, minimal armor, the smallest possible hull. They created what the French called a chenillette, a little caterpillar. The official designation was Renault UE, standing for Union Européenne, though no one remembers why. The result looked less like a tank and more like a motorized sled with tracks. The hull measured just 9 feet long and 5.5 feet wide. Height barely reached 3.5 feet to the top of the driver's compartment. Two men sat squeezed side by side under a cramped superstructure with barely enough room to move. The driver on the left operated simple controls. His companion, often called the trailer operator, squeezed in on the right with no real duties except to dismount and handle the supply trailer. Protection was almost theoretical. The frontal armor reached only 9 millimeters thick, the sides a mere 5 millimeters. Enough to stop shell fragments and pistol rounds. Rifle bullets from anything larger than a pistol caliber weapon could punch through at close range. The designers never intended this vehicle to go anywhere near direct combat. Power came from a tiny Renault 4-cylinder gasoline engine producing just 38 horsepower, the same engine used in Renault's civilian trucks. This anemic power plant pushed the UE to a maximum speed of 30 kilometers per hour on roads. Cross-country, it crawled at half that pace. The Chenillette weighed 2 3/4 tons empty, light enough that the engine didn't need to work hard for acceptable reliability. The track system used rubber road wheels and small drive sprockets. Simple, cheap, easy to manufacture. The suspension had limited travel, making rides uncomfortable but keeping complexity low. Everything about the design prioritized cost and production speed over performance. Most variants carried no armament whatsoever. Some mounted a single 7.5 mm Mach 31 machine gun in a ball mount on the superstructure front. This gave the crew something to defend themselves with during retreats or ambushes, nothing more. The machine gun's position and limited traverse made it nearly useless for offensive action. The real weapon of the Renault UE was its trailer. A small two-wheeled cart attached to the rear carried supplies, ammunition crates, or engineering equipment. The Chenillette could tow up to 600 kilograms. That payload capacity allowed a single UE to replace a 6-horse team. The trailer tracked faithfully behind the vehicle, following the same path through obstacles and soft ground. For specialized roles, Renault developed variants. Some carried cable-laying equipment for field communications. Others mounted ammunition racks designed specifically for 25 mm or 47 mm anti-tank gun shells. A handful became ammunition carriers for heavy mortars. But the vast majority remained simple supply tractors. Production began in 1932 and immediately proved the concept sound. The French army ordered them in unprecedented numbers for a tracked vehicle. By 1937, Renault had delivered over 2,000. Production accelerated as war approached. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, French factories shifted into high gear. The Chenillette's simple design made it ideal for rapid mass production. A single factory could turn out dozens per month using semi-skilled labor and simple tooling. By June 1940, total production had reached approximately 5,100 units. The French army distributed them everywhere. Every infantry division received dozens to replace horse-drawn supply wagons. Artillery units used them to tow light anti-tank guns and haul ammunition. Engineer companies employed them for transporting bridging equipment and engineering stores. Reconnaissance units found them useful for carrying extra fuel and supplies during extended patrols. Yet for all this production, for all their widespread deployment, the Renault UE remained nearly invisible. They worked behind the lines in supply columns at artillery positions. While Char B-1 heavy tanks and Somoua cavalry tanks grabbed attention, thousands of tiny Chenillettes chugged along unnoticed, doing the unglamorous work that kept French divisions functioning. Then came May 1940. The Wehrmacht smashed through the Ardennes, and France's army shattered in 6 weeks of catastrophic defeat. Soldiers abandoned equipment by the trainload as they retreated. Anti-tank guns sat beside roads, out of ammunition. Artillery pieces stood silent, their crews scattered. And everywhere, sitting in motor pools, scattered along roadsides, hidden in barns and warehouses, thousands upon thousands of Renault UE Chenillettes waited for new masters. The German Wehrmacht captured more than 3,000 Renault UE Chenillettes in perfect or repairable condition. Officers initially dismissed them as worthless French junk, barely worth cataloging. Then the reality of occupation logistics changed every calculation. Germany faced the same problem France had tried to solve. Modern mechanized warfare consumed staggering quantities of supplies. Every advancing division needed thousands of tons of ammunition, fuel, food, and equipment delivered across distances that made horse transport impractical and wheeled trucks inadequate. The blitzkrieg could smash through enemy lines, but keeping those spearheads supplied remained an endless headache. The captured Chenillettes offered a solution. They were simple, reliable, and already manufactured by the thousands. Better yet, they required minimal training to operate and simple maintenance that field workshops could handle. The Germans redesignated them Infanterie Schlepper UE 303F, infantry tractor Renault UE 303mm track width, French origin, bureaucratic precision applied to stolen equipment. Wehrmacht engineers immediately began modifications. They stripped off the useless 7.5mm machine guns and replaced them with German MG-34 machine guns in modified mounts. Some received improvised armor shields to give the crew better protection. The French trailers were replaced with German-designed cargo sledges that could carry heavier loads. Then came more radical conversions. Germany desperately needed self-propelled anti-tank weapons for infantry divisions that lacked proper tank destroyers. The Chenillettes' tracked chassis, while weak, could mount a gun. Engineers welded a 3.7 centimeter Pak 35 anti-tank gun directly onto the hull. The tiny vehicle became the Panzerwaffe UE, a makeshift tank destroyer with barely enough armor to stop small arms fire. The crew sat completely exposed behind a small gun shield. Recoil from firing made the entire vehicle rock backwards. But it could kill light tanks and armored cars, and that made it valuable. More ambitious conversions followed. Some Chenillettes received mounting brackets for the more powerful 4.7 centimeter Pak-T anti-tank gun, captured Czech weapons that Germany pressed into service everywhere. Others became ammunition carriers specifically designed to follow larger, self-propelled guns. A few even mounted rocket launcher frames for multiple launch rocket systems. The Wehrmacht deployed these converted French tankettes across every theater. They appeared on the Eastern Front following infantry divisions through the mud of Russia, where their tracks gave them mobility wheeled vehicles could never match. They served in North Africa with Rommel's Afrika Korps, hauling supplies across desert terrain. They garrisoned occupied territories from Norway to Greece. Combat records remain fragmentary, but surviving reports show the UE performed exactly as designed. Not glamorous, not powerful, but reliable and useful. A Wehrmacht supply officer in Russia noted that captured French tractors often proved more dependable than German half-tracks in extreme cold. Their simple engines started when more sophisticated vehicles froze solid. The Panzerjäger conversions saw real combat, though their effectiveness was limited. Soviet reports from 1941 and 42 mention encountering tiny, tracked vehicles mounting anti-tank guns. Soviet tankers quickly learned these improvised tank destroyers died easily to machine gun fire and high explosive shells. Their thin armor provided almost no protection. Crews suffered horrific casualties. Yet Germany kept using them because alternatives didn't exist. Proper self-propelled anti-tank guns took time and resources to build. The converted Chenillettes cost almost nothing and could be fielded immediately. Other nations noticed. Romania received several dozen captured UE carriers from Germany and used them throughout the war. Italian forces in the Balkans operated small numbers for supply duties. Even the Soviet Union captured some from the Germans and pressed them into service, adding another layer to their confusing history. Compared to purpose-built supply vehicles, The Renault UE was objectively inferior in almost every measure. Germany's own SDKFZ 10 and 11 half-tracks carried more cargo, moved faster, and provided better protection. Britain's universal carrier, superficially similar in concept, mounted proper weapons and served effectively as a fighting vehicle. But those vehicles cost 3 to 5 times as much to manufacture. They required trained crews and sophisticated maintenance. The Chenillette's brutal simplicity remained its greatest advantage. Any mechanic could fix one. Any soldier could drive one. They broke down less often than more complex vehicles and required fewer spare parts. The UE disappeared into history for several reasons, all predictable. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't win dramatic victories. It appeared in no propaganda films, no heroic photographs. Supply vehicles never received the attention given to tanks and artillery. Most were simply used up and discarded. By 1944, the Germans had worn out or destroyed most of their captured stock. The survivors ended up abandoned as Germany retreated on all fronts. A few lingered in French service after liberation, relegated to training duties and depot work. The last operational examples probably survived until the early 1950s, before being scrapped as obsolete. No museums preserved them in significant numbers. Perhaps 50 examples survive worldwide today, most in poor condition. Collectors ignore them, historians overlook them. The Renault UE Chenillette succeeded completely at its mission, then vanished from memory as thoroughly as the horses it replaced. Yet 5,000 of these unglamorous little machines did more to keep armies moving than most celebrated tanks ever accomplished. They proved that winning wars requires more than firepower and armor. Sometimes victory depends on the smallest, strangest vehicles no one remembers. If forgotten war machines like the Renault UE fascinate you, subscribe now. There are thousands more stories waiting in the shadows of history.